The movie begins in 2003, specifically in a courtroom, where we see the judge and the jury asking David Marks, a famous real estate owner, to tell them about his past and about his mother. We then go into a flashback with David, who says that he was a spoiled child, had a happy childhood, and that his mother loved him very much. The events then move to 1971, when David was buying some things for a party. He called his father to tell him that he had bought everything they needed, but his father, Sanford, asked him to visit one of their properties because a tenant was complaining about plumbing issues. When he arrives, he's surprised to see a beautiful girl open the door. He learns that her name is Katie, the new tenant, and it's obvious that he's attracted to her at first sight. He tries to fix the plumbing but fails, then tells her that he's late for a party and decides to invite her to come along with him. There, she meets his father, who's annoyed that David is late. Katie apologizes and says David was late because of her, but Sanford starts scolding his son, calling him a failure, and wonders how such a failure could convince a beautiful girl like her to come to the party. Katie defends David, saying he's handsome and smart, which annoys Sanford even more, especially when he notices her simple clothes and spontaneous way of talking. After that, Sanford introduces David to the guests, who are important figures, ambassadors and ministers. During dinner, Sanford keeps looking for his son, his supposed heir, but can't find him, because David is outside walking with Katie, talking about his dreams. He tells her that he wants to open a health food restaurant. Katie likes the idea and encourages him to go for it, telling him that she hopes to study medicine someday but can't afford it at the moment. Over time, they grow closer, fall in love, and get into a relationship. David fulfills his dream of opening a small restaurant. But Sanford isn't happy about it. He tells David that Katie doesn't belong in their family because she's from a poor background. David ignores his father's words and insists on staying with her. He visits her family and finds them to be happy and close-knit, completely different from his cold and strict father, who became harsh after his mother's death. Later, David proposes to Katie, she agrees, and they get married despite his father's disapproval. Perhaps that's why Sanford couldn't stand Katie, so much so that when he invited them for lunch after the wedding, he insisted they pay for their meal, embarrassing Katie's mother, who had to give up all the money she had. Time passes, and we reach 1972. David and Katie are now settled in Rutland, living off the small restaurant's income. Sanford visits his son, trying to convince him to return to work with him. He tells him that Katie is a beautiful woman who doesn't deserve to live such a hard life and that it's David's duty as a husband to provide her with a better one. David is persuaded and decides to return to New York to work with his father. Katie agrees. David joins his father's company and takes charge of the accounts. Soon, he buys a large house and brings Katie to live there. She's thrilled and asks if he wants them to have children. David is surprised by the question and says he's not ready to be a father. When she insists, he tells her he doesn't want children at all and that he's never talked about having any. She responds that it's natural for a married couple to want a child, but he completely refuses the idea. When she asks if he has a problem that prevents him from having kids, he says, "Think whatever you want," and repeats that he simply doesn't want children. Later, Katie overhears David talking to himself and realizes that he suffers from psychological issues caused by his father's harsh treatment. She decides not to bring up the topic of children again for now. The next day, they visit his friend Deborah, who tells Katie about the day David's mother committed suicide. She reveals that David saw his mother take her own life and hid under a table for a week afterward. When he finally came out, he acted as if he'd never had a mother at all. Katie is shocked and understands that David has deep psychological trauma, which could explain his refusal to have children. Katie tries to live normally with him afterward, but she remains tense and even starts smoking. One day, she searches through David's bag and finds a large amount of cash and a notebook filled with names and addresses. She realizes that part of David's work might be illegal, but she puts everything back and pretends she saw nothing. Time passes, and David hosts a big party at their lake house, inviting all his friends and Katie's relatives. Katie sits with her pregnant sister-in-law, asking her how it feels to be pregnant, and then quietly reveals that she's pregnant too. She looks anxious, not knowing how to tell David. That night, she decides to tell him. When she says she's pregnant, he reacts violently, angry and shouting that he doesn't want this baby, telling her she can ask for anything else and he'll give it to her. Katie tries to calm him, saying he's not like his father and would make a good dad, but David loses control, breaks everything around him, and begs her to get an abortion because he doesn't want to end up like his father. Under pressure, Katie agrees. The next day, he drives her to the clinic. On the way, they find out there's an issue at one of his father's properties, so David leaves her to go alone. She does, but from that day on, she can't stand him anymore. Their relationship deteriorates badly. Katie becomes constantly sad, while David acts as if nothing happened. One night, they go out to a bar, but David spends the whole time talking to a friend and ignoring her. Upset, she leaves and goes to her friend Lauren, who suggests she try drugs to forget her problems. Katie agrees, takes them, and laughs all night. But after that night, everything changes. Katie decides to live alone in the lake house and pursue her dream of studying medicine. They live apart for several months, not knowing much about each other's lives. One day, David decides to visit her to check on her and finds out that she's been accepted into medical school. He becomes furious and goes swimming in the lake. Katie follows him to make peace, and they reconcile, living together again, until she graduates from medical school, at which point David begins to grow jealous because she has achieved her dream. At night, Katie's mother throws a party for her and her sisters to celebrate her, but during the party, David becomes upset and tells Katie to get ready to leave. She refuses, saying she wants to stay and enjoy the evening with her sisters, but he insists they must go because he has important matters to deal with. She gets angry and tells him there's nothing important in their lives, referring to their lack of children. David walks out, saying he'll be waiting for her in the car. When she takes too long, he becomes furious, storms back inside, hits her, drags her by the hair, and forces her out. Katie fights back, packs her clothes, and decides to leave him for good. But he threatens her, saying that if she does, he won't spend another penny on her and she'll have nowhere to live. The next day, she tells her friend Lauren what happened, and they discover that David kept his word. He closed her bank account. Lauren advises her to see a lawyer and file for divorce, reminding her that under American law, a wife has the right to have her husband's assets. However, Katie is shocked to learn that all of the Marks family's wealth is registered under David's father's name, meaning David himself owns nothing. The lawyer tells her that she has only two options left, either stay with David and endure it, or find a way to expose them and use that as leverage. When Katie returns home, she acts normally around David, but he tells her he knows exactly where she's been and what she was trying to do. They get into a violent argument, and David hits her again. The neighbors hear a loud thud, and Katie rushes outside asking for help. When a neighbor offers to call the police, she gets scared and decides to go back to David. The next day, Katie goes to his father's company and remembers the notebook that proves David and Sanford's involvement in illegal dealings. She manages to get hold of it and sends it to the police, but the authorities ignore it due to Sanford's powerful connections. When Sanford finds out that Katie was the one who sent the notebook, he becomes furious with David, telling him to deal with her, and give her whatever she wants to keep her quiet. He scolds him harshly, then removes him from the accounting department, giving the position to his younger brother. After that, Katie's mental health deteriorates. She sinks into depression and visits her mother, telling her she can't bear living with David anymore. Her mother urges her to be patient, to endure, and to return home. Katie then calls David, begging him to grant her a divorce. He tells her to come home and promises to do whatever she asks. She returns, but when she looks for her dog, David says the dog bit him and that he sent it to a shelter. Katie soon notices the dog's collar covered in blood and realizes that David killed it. She confronts him, and a violent fight breaks out. The neighbors again hear a loud crash, but this time, no one knocks on the door. Later, we see David visiting his father, holding a photo of his mother, and saying, "I've become just like you." Sanford doesn't understand, so David asks why he made him watch his mother kill herself. Sanford replies that he thought seeing her son would stop her from doing it. The father then asks what David did to Katie, but David doesn't answer and walks away. We then flash back to 1982, when Katie disappears. According to David, he dropped her off at the train station. Some witnesses claimed she returned to their city apartment that same night and left the next morning, never to be seen again, according to the building's doorman. In the present, 2003, the judge asks David about Katie's disappearance and whether he was ever charged at the time. We return once more to the past, where Katie's brother is seen posting flyers and searching for her everywhere, while David's friend Deborah announces that the Marks family has offered a huge reward for anyone who finds Katie. In 2000, the case is reopened after new evidence surfaces. David says that people and reporters were constantly following him, so he decided to move to Texas, rent an apartment, and disguise himself as a woman. He lived there happily for a while and befriended his neighbor, Malvern. Meanwhile, Deborah began calling David, asking for money because she was broke, but he kept avoiding her and never answered her calls. The next day, David went out with Malvern, told him his story, and learned that Malvern was deeply in debt. Malvern said he would do anything to pay off his debts. Later, Deborah called David again, but this time, she threatened to expose everything if he didn't pay her. David then made a deal with Malvern. He would pay off all his debts if he killed Deborah. Malvern agreed and carried out the murder. But David didn't keep his promise and ignored his calls afterward. Feeling betrayed, Malvern went to David's house in anger, and a fight broke out between them. David killed him, panicked, dismembered the body, and threw it into the sea. Some time later, the body was discovered, and David was charged with Malvern's murder. However, he managed to prove that Malvern had attacked him first and intended to kill him, so it was ruled as self-defense. He wasn't imprisoned for murder but was sentenced to 9 months in jail for illegally disposing of the body. We also learn that Deborah's murder case was marked unknown perpetrator, and no solid evidence ever linked David to Katie's disappearance. But here comes the shocking twist. Deborah had put on a wig and gone to David's city apartment disguised as Katie, meaning Katie never actually went there. The witnesses who claimed to have seen her were actually seeing Deborah. This proves that David was responsible for Katie's disappearance since she was last seen alive with him. The biggest twist, however, is that when Sanford visited his son and saw Katie's dead body, he realized that David had killed her, but he chose to stay silent. In the end, we see David visiting his father in the hospital, saying, "Katie misses you so much." The case remains officially classified as a missing person under mysterious circumstances, and stays open until 2003, while David continues living his life without ever facing justice for his crimes.